Surrounded by armed men and taken with her children to fulfill a judicial agreement, she had no choice. Until, while crossing the river, she jumped with the children and disappeared among roots and stones. From that moment on, nothing would be the same. Watch until the end and discover why this silent escape mobilized an entire village. Subscribe to the channel and follow this true story of resistance. Her name no longer mattered to anyone except her children. Teresa Vieira, 32 years old, carried on her face the marks of the Bahian backlands and in her eyes the weariness of someone who had already lost much more than dreams. 5 small children, Sebastião, 10 years old, the twins Lucia and Aparecida, 8, Joaquim, 6, and little Antonio, only 3, followed her steps as they crossed the dusty courtyard of the Bom Jesus de Lapa courthouse. Sweat ran down their foreheads, but it wasn't just the 40-degree heat that made them tremble. It was the weight of what was about to happen. Judge Clovis Mendonça, a man of severe features and a close friend of the region's powerful figures, brought down his gavel on their fate without even raising his eyes from the papers. For the APACHE debt left by the late Josué Vieira, I determined that the widow and her dependents be transferred as part of the payment to Fazenda Boa Vista, property of Colonel Geronimo Albuquerque. Case closed. The words fell like stones. Teresa didn't understand laws, but she perfectly understood the meaning of that. They were now property of the Colonel, the most feared man in the São Francisco Valley, known for treating people like cattle and keeping entire families in debt servitude that never ended. The Colonel's henchmen didn't wait a second. They surrounded the family and led them outside, pushing the crying children who didn't understand what was happening. A rusty truck awaited them, the bed covered by a worn tarpaulin. "Get in quickly," ordered the foreman Tobias, a man with scars on his face and eyes empty of any compassion. "The Colonel doesn't like to wait." Teresa hesitated, holding little Antonio against her chest. "Where are we going?" It was the only question she managed to formulate. The foreman laughed, displaying teeth yellowed by tobacco. "Now you belong to Boa Vista. You'll work to pay what you owe. And consider yourselves lucky. The Colonel forgave half the debt just because of the children. He needs young arms in the fields." A chill ran down Teresa's spine. Stories about Fazenda Boa Vista circulated throughout the backlands. People who entered and were never seen again. Children who grew up knowing nothing beyond forced labor. Women who disappeared on nights when the Colonel visited the lodgings. Pushed into the truck with her children, Teresa felt the world collapse. The vehicle took off violently, throwing them against the floorboards. The children huddled around her, seeking protection. "Mom, where are we going?" asked Sebastião, the oldest, trying to seem strong despite the fear evident in his voice. Teresa didn't answer. Her eyes were fixed on the landscape passing through the gap in the tarpaulin. The backlands stretched out, relentless with its cacti and twisted jurema trees, as resilient as she would need to be. The journey lasted hours on dirt roads. The heat inside the truck bed was suffocating, and little Antonio cried from thirst. When the truck finally stopped, it was almost night. They were at the edge of the São Francisco River, at a point where the crossing would be made by ferry. The foreman got down and ordered everyone to get out to stretch their legs while waiting for the boat. "Don't even think about running away," he warned, patting the handle of the revolver he carried at his waist. "There's nowhere to go except to jaguars and rattlesnakes." Teresa observed the surroundings. To the left, the immense muddy river snaked between banks. To the right, a dense forest of carabeira and aroeira trees extended for a few kilometers. Beyond them, only the infinite backlands. The foreman walked away to talk with the ferryman approaching from the other bank. That's when Teresa noticed a detail. The current seemed strong in the middle of the river, but there was a shallow stretch near the rocks, where the water barely reached knee-height. Her eyes met Sebastião's, and she saw that her son had also noticed. Without words, just with minimal gestures, Teresa gathered her children. "When I say now, you run to those rocks in the river, pass through the shallow water, and enter the forest on the other side. Sebastião, you take Joaquim, I'll take Antonio. Lucia and Aparecida, you two stay together, holding each other's hand." "Understood." The children nodded, their eyes wide with fear and excitement. Teresa waited for the exact moment when the foreman turned his back to help the ferryman dock. Now! In seconds, the children darted toward the rocks. Teresa, with Antonio in her arms, ran right behind. The foreman took precious seconds to understand what was happening. When he turned around, the family was already in the middle of the river, crossing the shallow part. "Come back here, wretches!" he shouted, drawing his revolver. A shot echoed, hitting the water a few meters from where they were passing. Another shot, narrowly missing Teresa's head. But it was too late. The children had reached the other bank and disappeared among the first trees of the forest. Teresa, with one last effort, dove among the exposed roots of a giant gamalera tree, pulling Antonio with her. The foreman cursed and shot blindly, but the fugitives were already protected by the dense vegetation. "You won't get far," he yelled. "The colonel has men throughout the region. Tomorrow you'll be back if you don't find something worse before." His threats were lost in the wind as Teresa and her children pushed deeper into the dense forest. Night fell quickly, as always happens, in the backlands. Darkness swallowed them, but also protected them. They walked for hours, guided only by the weak light of stars that barely penetrated the foliage. Little Antonio fell asleep in his mother's arms, exhausted. The twins stumbled from fatigue, but no one dared to stop. It was Sebastião who finally broke the silence. "Mom, we have to rest. The girls can't take it anymore." Teresa knew he was right. She chose a small clearing protected by tall trees, and there they settled as best they could, without food, without water, without protection beyond their own courage. While the children cuddled each other to ward off the cold, Teresa remained, vigilant, her ears attentive to any suspicious sound. Her thoughts were a whirlwind. Where would they go? How would she feed 5 children in the middle of nowhere? How long would it take before the colonel's men found them? The answer to the last question came sooner than expected. Dawn had not yet broken when the sound of voices and barking dogs reached them, distant but unmistakable. The hunt had begun. Teresa awakened the children urgently, a finger to her lips asking for silence. The sound of dogs was closer, and with girt male voices that cut through the tranquility of the forest. "Come on, we need to keep walking," she whispered, helping the twins to their feet. Everyone's eyes were heavy with sleep and fear. Sebastião, trying to be the man his father could not continue to be, took Joaquim by the hand. "This way, Mom," he pointed to the opposite side from where the barking was coming. They walked as fast as they could, stumbling on roots, scratching themselves on thorns, suppressing groans of pain so as not to reveal their location. Little Antonio, whom Teresa carried firmly against her chest, remained strangely quiet, as if he understood the danger surrounding them. The forest grew denser, and soon the sound of the pursuers diminished until it disappeared. But Teresa knew this didn't mean safety. The colonel would not easily give up what he considered his property. They continued forward, guided only by instinct and necessity. After hours of walking, the vegetation began to change. The tall trees gave way to a more open caatinga, with cacti and twisted shrubs. Thirst was now unbearable. The twins cried softly, and even Sebastião seemed about to collapse. "Water," murmured Lucia, her dry tongue barely able to form the word. That's when Joaquim pointed beyond a rocky formation. "Look, smoke." Indeed, a thin line of smoke rose, in the distance, almost imperceptible against the sky that was beginning to lighten. It could be a camp, a house, perhaps even a village, or it could be a trap. "Let's see, but very carefully," Teresa decided after a few moments of hesitation. Hunger and thirst spoke louder than fear. They approached slowly, hiding behind rocks and sparse vegetation. When they finally had a clear view of the source of the smoke, they saw a small village, about 20 huts arranged in a circle, some made of woven straw, others of clay and wood. In the center a fire still burned, and around it 3 men talked in low voices. Teresa immediately recognized they were indigenous people of the Pataxo tribe who still resisted in small isolated nuclei in that region. The children had never seen indigenous people so close, in their eyes a mixture of fascination and apprehension. "Are they savages, Mum?" asked Aparecida, squeezing her twin sister's hand. "No, daughter. They're people like us, they just live differently," explained Teresa, remembering the stories her grandmother told about the native peoples who inhabited those lands long before the arrival of farmers and colonels. They needed to decide, risk asking for help or continue their uncertain flight. The decision was made for them when little Antonio, seeing a dog approaching the rocks where they were hiding, let out a laugh of joy. The sound, though low, was enough to alert the animal, which began to bark insistently. In seconds, several men from the village surrounded the area, armed with bows and spears. Teresa embraced her children, placing herself in front of them. "Please," she said in a trembling voice, "we don't want to harm anyone. We're just hungry and thirsty." The men looked at each other, confused by the presence of a white woman and 5 ragged children in the middle of the backlands. One of them, older than the others, stepped forward. His face was marked by deep wrinkles, and his graying hair was tied in a ponytail. He spoke a few words in a language Teresa did not understand, but his tone did not seem hostile. Another man, younger and stronger, also approached. Unlike the others, he wore cotton pants along with the traditional adornments. "What are you doing here?" he asked in clear Portuguese, albeit with a strong accent. Teresa hesitated, but she knew that only the truth could help them now. "We're running away. Colonel Geronimo took us as debt payment. We were going to be taken to Fazenda Boa Vista to work until we died." Upon hearing the colonel's name, several of the indigenous people made gestures of displeasure. The man who spoke Portuguese frowned. "Geronimo Albuquerque? The man who burns villages and steals lands?" Teresa nodded, surprised they knew her pursuer so well. "The very one." The older man spoke again in his language, gesturing intensely. After a brief discussion among them, the younger one turned to Teresa. "Tupana Page says that hungry children must eat, no matter where they come from. Come with us, but know that if you bring problems, you'll have to leave." Teresa felt her legs weaken with relief. "Thank you. My name is Teresa Vieira and these are my children." The man nodded seriously. "I am Raoni. Among us, I'm the only one who speaks the white people's language well. I learned from the missionaries before they were expelled by your colonel." Guided by Raoni, they entered the village under the curious gazes of women, children, and elders. Some seemed suspicious, others openly hostile, but most showed only curiosity. They were taken to the central fire, where they received fresh water and a hot broth made with manioc and game. The children ate eagerly, while Teresa observed the surroundings still tense and vigilant. The village was simple but organized. Some women worked with ceramics, others wove straw or prepared food. Small children ran freely, occasionally stopping to observe the strange visitors. The Page Tupa sat beside Teresa and through Raoni began to ask questions. He wanted to know details about the escape, about the colonel, about what they intended to do. Teresa answered honestly, without hiding her desperation and uncertainty about the future. As they talked, Raoni translated everything to the other tribe members who gathered around. Many nodded in agreement when Teresa described the colonel's injustices. "The white man with the big hat has already killed many of our people," said an elderly woman through Raoni. "Burned entire villages to plant his cotton and raise his cattle. Says we have to leave, that this land has an owner now." Teresa lowered her eyes, ashamed. "I'm sorry. I didn't know that." The page made a wide gesture with his hands and spoke at length. Raoni translated, "Tupa says you are not to blame for the crimes of others, but he also says that bringing you to the village is dangerous. The colonel has many armed men, and our people are already few." A younger woman with a baby tied to her back approached and spoke directly to Teresa in broken Portuguese. "I Iratema, husband killed by henchmen. I understand your pain." She placed her hand on Teresa's shoulder in a gesture of solidarity that transcended differences in language and culture. The debate continued for hours. Some argued that Teresa and the children should leave as soon as they were fed and rested. Others argued that delivering them to their fate would be the same as condemning them. Raoni remained silent, observing everything with attentive eyes. Finally, he stood up and spoke with a firm voice. "If no one else will protect them, I will, even if I have to build a separate hut away from the village." His words caused agitation. The page raised his hands, asking for silence, and addressed Rowney in a severe tone. But the young indigenous man did not back down. "I respect the elders and the council's decisions, but I also respect what is right. This woman fled as we fled. These children are hungry as our children are hungry. If we send them away, we are no better than the colonel." A heavy silence fell over the village. Teresa, even without understanding all the words, perfectly understood what was at stake. She hugged her children, preparing for any decision. That's when little Antonio, recovered after eating and drinking, stood up unsteadily and walked to the page. With the innocence of his 3 years, he offered the old man the small piece of bread he was still holding. The gesture, so simple and pure, made the old man smile for the first time. He took the bread, broke it in half, and returned a part to the child. Then he looked at Teresa and spoke slowly. Rowney translated, a smile forming on his lips. "Tupa says that the little ones see what the grown-ups forget. You can stay for now, but at the first sign of danger to the tribe, you will have to leave." That night, Teresa and her children slept in a hut provided by Iracema on soft, woven straw mats. For the first time since the escape, they allowed themselves to truly relax. But the relief would be brief. On the horizon, dark clouds were forming, not just in the sky, but also in the future that awaited them. Days turned into weeks, and gradually the presence of Teresa and her children ceased to be a novelty in the Pataxo village. The children, with the adaptability that only childhood allows, were soon running and playing with the others, learning words in the indigenous language, discovering the secrets of the forest and the rhythms of a completely different life from what they knew. Sebastião accompanied the young warriors on hunts, learning to use bow and arrow to identify animal tracks, to move silently through the vegetation. The twins Lucia and Aparecida helped with harvesting fruits and preparing food, while Joaquim became inseparable from a Pataxo boy his age, with whom he explored every corner of the village. Little Antonio, in turn, had conquered the heart of the old page Tupa. The elder carried him everywhere, teaching him ancient songs and showing him the medicinal plants he collected. To everyone's surprise, the boy began to babble words in the Pataxo language before even fully mastering Portuguese. Teresa observed everything with a mixture of gratitude and apprehension. She worked tirelessly to compensate for the hospitality received. She helped in the fields, learned to make pottery with the older women, contributed to all community tasks. But her thoughts frequently returned to the danger that still lurked. Colonel Geronimo was not a man to give up easily, and the longer they stayed there, the greater his fury would be when he found them. Who surprised her most was Rowney, the young warrior, who initially positioned himself as her protector more out of principle than affinity, now showed a genuine interest in the family's well-being. He taught Sebastião with patience, brought special fruits for the girls, and often sat beside Teresa on fire nights, translating stories and songs so she could understand. One morning, while they worked together building a new hut, since the family could not indefinitely remain as Iracema's guests, Rowney finally asked what he so wanted to know. What happened to the children's father? Teresa remained silent for a long moment, her hands busy with the straw she was weaving, her eyes fixed on a distant point. Josue was a good man, she began in a low voice. Hard-working, honest, but he was also too much of a dreamer. He believed he could have his own land one day, plant without having to give half to the boss. He borrowed money from the colonel to buy seeds and tools, said in 2 years he would pay everything with interest. Rowney nodded, perfectly understanding the trap the man had fallen into. The first year was good, the harvest abundant. Josue paid part of the debt, but then came the drought, the worst in decades. We lost everything. The colonel gave more time, but with interest that doubled every month. Josue began to waste away with worry. One night he went out hunting and never returned. Rowney frowned. Did he abandon you? Teresa slowly shook her head. No, Josue would never do that. The colonel's men found his hat by the river days later. They say he was attacked by a jaguar, or that he slipped and the current took him. We never knew for sure. Her eyes filled with held-back tears. The worst was that the colonel didn't want to wait even for the mourning period. He sent his henchmen to take us to the judge the next day. Said the debt needed to be paid one way or another. Rowney remained silent for a few moments, absorbing the story. Then, with a delicate gesture that contrasted with his physical strength, he lightly touched Teresa's shoulder. Your husband's spirit rests now, and your children are safe. Teresa raised her eyes, meeting Rowney's. There was something in that look, an unspoken promise, a mutual understanding, that made her heart race. But the moment was interrupted by shouts coming from the village entrance. One of the young warriors who kept watch ran toward the center, shouting words that Teresa didn't understand, but whose tone of urgency was unmistakable. In seconds, the entire village was on alert. Rowney jumped to his feet. "Stay here," he ordered, running to join the other men who were already gathering around the messenger. Teresa disobeyed, following close behind. She needed to know what was happening. The young lookout spoke rapidly, gesturing toward the north. Rowney translated for Teresa. 2 hunters from the tribe went to the village of Santa Cruz to trade furs for salt. They heard that the colonel offered a reward for any information about your whereabouts. 100,000 rays for you and the children alive. Teresa's blood froze. It was a huge amount, enough to tempt any desperate person in that region plagued by poverty. "And there's more," continued Rowney, his face grave. "He gave a deadline. If you don't appear in a week, he'll gather enough men to clean the entire area. Says he'll search every village, every cabin, every hole." The page Tupar, who had heard everything in silence, finally spoke. His voice was calm, but his eyes revealed concern. Rowney translated again. "Tupar says we have 3 days, at most, before someone from the village decides to earn the reward. Not everyone in that village is a friend of the Pataxo." A council was immediately convened. While the older men and women gathered in the central hut, Teresa ran to find her children and keep them close. She found the twins helping to grind corn, Joaquim playing with other children, and Sebastião practicing with the bow. Only Antonio was absent. "Where is my son?" she asked, panic beginning to overtake her. "With Tupar," replied one of the women, pointing to the page's hut. "They've been gathering herbs since early morning." Teresa breathed relieved and gathered the other 4. "Stay together and close to our hut. Don't move away for anything." Sebastião, sensing his mother's tension, asked softly, "They found us, didn't they?" Teresa couldn't lie. She just nodded, hugging her son tightly. The council lasted hours. Excited voices could be heard from outside, evidencing the heated debate happening inside. When it finally ended, the sun was already setting on the horizon. Rowney came out first, his face tense, followed by the other members. He approached Teresa, who waited anxiously with the children. "The council is divided," he explained. "Some think you should leave immediately, far away from here. Others believe that would condemn you to certain death." "And you, what do you think?" asked Teresa, holding the hands of the twins who trembled with fear. Rowney looked deeply into her eyes. "I think you've run away enough, that you deserve peace, that these children have the right to a future." He paused, carefully choosing his next words. "I suggested a different plan to the council. It wasn't accepted by everyone, but the majority agreed." He lowered his voice, making sure only Teresa could hear. "I'm going to Fazenda Boavista. I'm going to speak directly with Colonel Geronimo." Teresa's eyes widened, horrified. "No, he'll kill you." Rowney smiled slightly. "I'm not so easy to kill, and I'm not going alone. Tupar and 3 other warriors will come with me. We're going to propose a deal." "What kind of deal?" "The colonel doesn't negotiate, he takes what he wants." The anguish in Teresa's voice was palpable. "We have something he wants very much, even more than you and the children." Faced with Teresa's confused look, Rowney explained, "Knowledge. We know where the best lands for planting are, the springs that never dry up, even in the worst drought. The colonel has been trying to expand his plantations to the north for years, but always fails because he doesn't know the land like we do." "Teresa," shook her head, incredulous. He'll never accept. Maybe not, but we must try. The alternative is war. And in that, even if we fight bravely, many innocents will suffer. The plan was put into action the next morning. Raoni, Tupar, and 3 other warriors departed at dawn, taking only the strictly necessary. Before leaving, Raoni knelt before little Antonio and placed a necklace of seeds around his neck. "To protect you while I'm away," he said, smiling at the boy who looked at him with adoration. Then he stood up and faced Teresa's gaze. 3 days, he promised. "In 3 days we'll be back, with a solution or with bad news. If we don't return..." He left the sentence unfinished, but the meaning was clear. "You will return," affirmed Teresa with a conviction she didn't really feel. "We'll be waiting." The days that followed were the longest in Teresa's life. The entire village seemed to hold its breath, waiting for the outcome of that risky mission. The children, feeling the tension in the air, became restless and irritable. Only Antonio maintained an unusual serenity, playing with the necklace. Raoni had given him as if it were the most precious treasure in the world. On the night of the second day, Iracema came to sit beside Teresa, who contemplated the almost extinguished fire of the bonfire. "Raoni is strong man, wise man," she said, in her limited Portuguese. "He returns." Teresa nodded, grateful for the comfort. "Why does he do this for us? Risk so much for people he barely knows?" Iracema smiled, her eyes reflecting the last embers. "Raoni lose family when small. Father, mother, sisters, all dead from white man's disease. Tupar raise him, teach him strength not just in arm, but here." She touched her own chest at the height of the heart. "Raoni sees in your children what he lost. In you sees chance to do different." On the morning of the 3rd day, the entire village was on watch. Children were positioned in the tallest trees to spot any approach. The hours dragged on with agonizing slowness. The sun was already beginning to set when a shout echoed through the village. "They return! They return!" Teresa ran to the village entrance, her heart pounding. In the distance, 5 silhouettes approached slowly. Raoni, Tupar, the 3 warriors. They were all there, apparently unharmed, but there was something in their posture, in the way they walked, that made Teresa shudder. Something had changed. And when they finally came close enough for her to see their faces, she knew the worst was yet to come. Raoni stepped forward, his grave countenance contrasting with the relief in his eyes upon seeing Teresa and the children waiting. The entire village gathered around the newcomers, anxious voices simultaneously asking about the result of the mission. The page Tupar raised his hands, asking for silence, and began to speak. His voice, normally firm, sounded tired. Raoni translated for Teresa, who held Antonio in her arms while the other children clung to her skirt. "The colonel received us," said Raoni, "not with respect, but also not with immediate violence. He was too curious to know what led us voluntarily to his farm. He paused, choosing his words. "We presented our proposal, knowledge about the northern lands in exchange for your family's freedom." He laughed, said he could take that knowledge whenever he wanted, that he just needed to capture one of us and convince them to speak. Teresa shuddered, imagining the colonel's methods of convincing. Then Tupar did something unexpected. He asked to speak privately with the colonel. Just the 2 of them, no henchmen, no witnesses. All eyes turned to the old page, who continued the account in his language, his wrinkled face contorted in expressions ranging from indignation to deep sadness. When he finished, Raoni continued. The colonel accepted the private meeting, driven by curiosity. Tupar told him about visions he had, visions of prolonged drought, of plagues that destroy plantations, of waters that recede. He said that only the knowledge of the ancients could prevent the approaching ruin. "And he believed it?" asked Teresa, incredulous. Raoni smiled without humor. "The colonel is superstitious like many powerful men. He fears what he doesn't understand." Tupar played with that fear. The page spoke again, and Raoni translated. Tupar offered him a different pact. He said that his village would send 2 young men each season to work on the colonel's lands. teaching planting techniques that resist drought. In exchange, the colonel would renounce any right over you and your children. A murmur ran through the crowd. That meant forced labor disguised as an agreement, too high a price to pay. Teresa felt the weight of guilt fall on her shoulders. "No," she said firmly, "I cannot accept this. I cannot allow others to suffer in our place." Raoni raised his hand, asking her to wait. "There's more." The colonel made a counter-proposal. He said he would accept the agreement, with one condition. You, Teresa, must appear at Fazenda Boa Vista and declare, before Judge Clovis and the local authorities, that you are voluntarily giving up any claim to the lands that belong to your husband. Teresa frowned, confused. Lands? What lands? Josue had no property at all. Raoni exchanged a significant look with Tupin before answering. From what we discovered, your husband had registered a plot of fertile land on the riverbanks, northeast of here. A small area, but valuable. The registration was made shortly, before his disappearance. The colonel wants that land, and he needs your signature as a widow to take it legally. The revelation hit Teresa like lightning. Josue had never mentioned such registration. Could that have been the real reason for his disappearance? Could the colonel have... She pushed away the disturbing thought. And if I refuse to sign? Raoni hesitated. Then the colonel declared that he will come in a week with 20 armed men. He said he will clean not just our village, but all in the region. He swore he would leave no stone unturned until he finds you and the children. A heavy silence fell over the village. The threat hung in the air like a storm cloud. It was Sebastian, with his 10 years and maturity forced by circumstances, who broke the silence. "Mom, we have to leave. We cannot bring this misfortune to the people who helped us." Teresa looked at her eldest son, her heart broken. He was right, of course, but where would they go? How would they survive? The tribal council met again, this time including Teresa. The debate was long and heated. Some argued they should prepare for war, better to die fighting than to live under the constant threat of the colonel. Others advocated that the entire village should move north, abandoning that territory before it was too late. An elderly woman with hair white as cotton rose with difficulty and spoke at length, her voice fragile, but determined. When she finished, everyone was silent. Raoni translated for Teresa. "Grandmother Jandira says that our tribe has fled too much, that every time we retreat, the white man advances more, that our children need roots, not wings, and that the land where our ancestors are buried cannot be abandoned." The old woman spoke again, looking directly at Teresa. "She says that you and your children are now part of this tribe, that your blood is not Pataxo, but your heart has become one with ours, and that the tribe does not abandon its own." Tears ran down Teresa's face. She had never imagined feeling such belonging, such unconditional acceptance, but that only made her decision more difficult. "I cannot accept that you sacrifice yourselves for us," she finally said. "I will go to Fazenda Boa Vista. I will sign whatever the colonel wants." Raoni translated her words, but immediately the page Tupin stood up, vigorously shaking his head. He spoke with authority, gesturing emphatically. "Tupin says you didn't understand," translated Raoni. "Signing that paper will not bring peace. The colonel will never be content with a piece of land. He wants everything: lands, people, power. If we yield now, tomorrow he will demand more." Irasima, who until then observed silently, spoke for the first time. "Colonel is snake, always wants more, never satisfied." Other voices rose in agreement. The decision was unanimous. They would not yield to the colonel's demands. But that meant preparing for the inevitable confrontation. The following days were of intense preparation. Warriors sharpened spears and arrows. Traps were strategically positioned on access trails. Sentinels took turns day and night. The women prepared medicines, stocked food, organized refuges for children and the elderly. Teresa and her children participated in everything, determined not to be just protected, but protectors as well. Sebastian trained tirelessly with the bow, becoming surprisingly skilled for his age. The twins helped prepare medicinal herbs. Even little Antonio did his part. enchanting everyone with songs he had learned from Tupa, songs of courage, of persistence, of hope. Raoni was everywhere, organizing, planning, encouraging. In the rare moments of rest, he sat beside Teresa, talking about the future, about possibilities that before seemed unthinkable. Something was being born between them, a connection that went beyond gratitude or responsibility, something that neither dared to name yet, but that gave both strength to face what was to come. On the eve of the deadline given by the colonel, an unexpected storm broke over the region. Torrential rain, lightning cutting the sky, howling winds. The huts trembled but resisted, protected by generations of knowledge about how to build to last. It was in the midst of this storm that a messenger arrived, a young Patakso from another village, soaked and exhausted. He brought urgent news. The colonel had mobilized not only his henchmen, but also the local police, convincing the authorities that the indigenous people were harboring criminals and inciting rebellion. The punitive expedition was already on its way, more numerous and better armed than expected. Faced with the new threat, Tupa made a drastic decision. He summoned Teresa, Raoni, and the tribal elders to the central hut. There he spoke at length, his voice laden with emotion and determination. When he finished, everyone looked at him with a mixture of surprise and reverence. Raoni translated, "For Teresa, Tupa will invoke the unity ceremony, an ancient ritual performed only in moments of extreme danger for the tribe. He will summon all Patakso in the region, including those who have long distanced themselves from our traditions. And he will do something more. He will extend his hand to other tribes and to the Quilombolas who live hidden in the hills." Teresa could hardly believe it. "Will they come?" Raoni nodded slowly. "Many will come. Tupa's call is respected beyond the boundaries of our village, and they all have reasons to fear and hate the colonel. This may be the opportunity they've been waiting for to join forces." The ceremony was held that same night, despite the persistent rain. In the center of the village, protected by an improvised cover, Tupa lit a sacred fire. Around him, the entire tribe gathered. The page painted symbols on his own body, lines and circles in red, black, and white representing union, strength, and renewal. Then, with solemn gestures, he painted the same symbols on Raoni, on the elders, and to everyone's surprise, on Teresa and her children. "You are Patakso now," translated Raoni, his voice choked with emotion. "Your children are children of the tribe. Your blood is our blood." The ritual continued throughout the night. Drums beat in a hypnotic rhythm, voices rose in ancestral chants, messengers departed in all directions, carrying news of the ceremony and the call to unity. One by one, representatives from other villages began to arrive, defying the storm, responding to the call. At dawn, the rain finally ceased. The sun rose in a clear sky, illuminating an extraordinary scene. Where before there was a small village, now gathered more than 200 people. Pataksos, Tupinambas, Quilombolas, Caboclos, all united by a common purpose. Among them, an unexpected figure stood out, a white man, middle-aged, wearing simple rural worker clothes. He approached where Teresa was, observing him without understanding. It was Raoni who introduced him. "This is Jeremias. He works as a scribe in the Ia, village of Santa Cruz. He was the one who registered your husband's lands." Teresa's eyes widened. "You knew Josue?" The man nodded, a sad smile on his lips. "I knew and admired him. A man of vision, your husband. He knew that the future was in the land, not in serving colonels, but in cultivating one's own soil. He paused, weighing his next words. "He sought me out a week before departing. He registered the land in your name and in the children's names. Said it was your guarantee for the future, should anything happen to him." Teresa felt her legs weaken. Raoni supported her, holding her by the arm. "Why are you here?" she asked the scribe. Jeremias took a yellowed envelope from his pocket. "Because I bring proof that the lands are legally yours, and because I know what really happened to Josue." Teresa's heart stopped for an instant. What happened?" The man looked around, making sure they wouldn't be overheard. "Josue discovered something the colonel has been hiding for years. The deeds to most of his lands are false. He illegally appropriated indigenous territories and small landowners' properties, using forged documents and the support of corrupt authorities. He took a deep breath before continuing. Your husband gathered evidence. He was about to denounce everything to the federal judge in Salvador. On the night he disappeared, he was intercepted by the colonel's henchmen. Teresa closed her eyes, tears running down her face. She didn't need to hear the rest to know. Jeremias placed the envelope in her hands. These are copies of the documents Josue gathered. I kept them all these years, waiting for the right moment. I think that moment has come. The news spread quickly through the gathered crowd. Indignation transformed into determination. What had begun as the defense of a family had become a larger fight for justice, for lands, for dignity. Tupa convened an expanded council, including leaders from all communities present. The plan that emerged was audacious. They would not wait for the colonel's attack. They would go to meet him, not to fight, but to confront him with the truth before. Witnesses he could not silence. At noon, an unusual procession departed from the village. At the front walked Tupa, Raoni, and other indigenous leaders, followed by Teresa and her children. Behind them, hundreds of people, men, women, and children of different origins, united in solemn silence. They carried no weapons, only the documents that would prove the colonel's fraud and white flags symbolizing their peaceful intentions. They met the punitive expedition halfway. Colonel Geronimo, mounted on an imposing black horse, led about 40 armed men, henchmen and police. His face, normally impassive, could not hide his surprise at seeing the crowd approaching. Raoni stepped forward, raising a white flag. "Colonel Geronimo Albuquerque," he called in a loud and clear voice. "We come in peace, but also in search of justice." The colonel narrowed his eyes, suspicious. "What charade is this? Where is the woman and the children you stole from me?" Teresa stepped forward, facing the man she so feared. "I am here, Colonel, along with my children and my people." Her voice no longer trembled. "And we've brought something that belongs to you." Jeremias approached, carrying the documents. "Do you recognize me, Colonel? I am the same scribe who helped forge your deeds, the same one you swore to kill if I spoke." "Well, I'm speaking now, and I have proof." A murmur ran through the ranks of the police. The sheriff, a middle-aged man who until then seemed determined to follow orders, dismounted from his horse and approached. "What proofs are these?" In Tsiu. The following minutes, Jeremias exposed everything. The falsified documents, the threats, the conspiracy to silence Josue. The Colonel's face contorted with fury and despair. When he tried to order an attack, he realized he was alone. His own henchmen were retreating, sensing that the wind had changed direction. The police, embarrassed at having been used, now pointed their weapons at the colonel. "Geronimo Albuquerque," the sheriff said formally, "you are detained under accusation of document forgery, illegal appropriation of lands, and—" he hesitated, looking at Teresa, "suspicion of involvement in the disappearance of Josue Vieira." The colonel, seeing himself cornered, attempted one last desperate act. He drew a weapon and pointed it at Teresa. "If I'm going down, I'm taking this wretch with me." But before he could pull the trigger, an arrow hit his arm, making him drop the gun with a cry of pain. Raoni lowered his bow, his gaze fixed on the man who now writhed. "No more," he said simply. "Your time is over." In the weeks that followed, the story spread throughout the Bahian backlands. Colonel Geronimo was taken to trial in Salvador. The illegally appropriated lands were returned, part to the Pataxos and other tribes, part to small farmers who had been expelled over the years. Fazenda Boa Vista itself, a symbol of oppression for so long, was transformed into a cooperative, managed jointly by indigenous people and local farmers. Teresa and her children remained in the Pataxo village, which now flourished with new buildings and abundant plantations. The small plot registered by Josue became a meeting point between cultures, a place where indigenous and non-indigenous children learned together, where traditions were preserved and new practices were born from the union of knowledge. A golden September afternoon, Raoni found Teresa sitting by the river, watching her children play with other children from the village. He sat beside her in silence as he had done so many times in the past months. "Do you think Josue would approve?" she finally asked, without taking her eyes off the children. "What we've done here? What we're building?" Raoni followed her gaze, contemplating the little ones who ran and laughed freely. Sebastio, now almost a man, taught bow and arrow techniques to the younger ones. The twins, with their braids adorned with colorful feathers, gathered fruits for the festival that would take place that night. Joaquim built a small canoe with the help of other boys, and Antonio, the youngest, sang an ancient Pataxo song with perfect pronunciation, sitting on the lap of the old page Tupa. "I think he's watching," replied Raoni, intertwining his fingers with Teresa's. "And I think he's smiling." That night, around the fire, the community gathered to celebrate. Not just the victory over the colonel, but something greater and more lasting. The birth of a new kind of family, of a new way of living. As the flames danced, illuminating faces of all colors, Teresa observed her children, no longer just hers but children of the tribe.